What is the best DPS in the Burning Crusade? Well, it depends if we're comparing Phase 1 or the overall expansion. In Burning Crusade Classic 2021, there were fights where you were also able to kill a boss in less than 20 seconds, and classes with insane cooldowns were also the ones being on top of the meter. In this case, it were basically just mages. However, a warrior were actually the best performing DPS on a fight like this, but it doesn't mean that the warrior will be the best DPS in Phase 1 or throughout the entire expansion, because many fights won't just be lasting for 20 seconds, some is going to be 2 and up to around 5 to 6 minutes a fight. This is where other classes will start to dominate when it's going to be an average DPS throughout a long fight. This is where other classes will start to do so much better, for example Druid, Paladin and also Shaman. I remember watching old tier lists before the release of Burning Crusade Classic 2021, and back then people were expecting warriors to be at the bottom of the meter, but this guy here proved everyone wrong, as he ended up being the best DPS in the world in Gruul Slayer. This is why I'm also making this tier list, as I feel like there's so much misinformation out there. However, Blizzard might end up doing some changes on the anniversary realms, and this could result in other classes doing so much better this time around. I've done some research, and the average DPS or best performing DPS seems to be BM Hunter, Arcane Mage, Survival Hunter, Destruction Warlock and Fury Warrior, and this is with the best possible gear, not in the beginning, because some classes are not going to be as gear dependent, therefore they will also be performing a lot better for the first couple of weeks until people start getting way better gear from raids. Another thing is that Arcane Mage is top 2 and way better than Frost and Fire, but there is a catch. If you wish to perform well as an Arcane Mage, then you're also depending on other people. For example, a Druid using their Innovate on you, or you'll be going out of mana in next to no time. A Priest with their Power Infusion to increase your spellcasting speed and also reduce your mana cost for 15 seconds. This is exactly why Arcane is also top 2. If you're not getting these buffs, well then Fire will be doing as great, if not better. The next thing I decided to research were how each individual specialization were performing before they got their pre-raid base gear. And in 10-man raids, mages and warlocks were doing the absolute best, and I had to scroll down to find the first couple of hunters. This were however not the same case when I swapped to 25-man raiding. All of a sudden, hunters and warlocks were at the top. Yeah, there were of course one mage, but else I had to start scrolling down until I found arcane and fire mages. The reason being that warlocks and hunters got a better average DPS for longer fights, ideal for 25 man. Some things changed the moment people got their best in slot gear. Yeah, we got a warrior at rank 1, but else it's mainly going to be hunters on top of the meter all the time. There's going to be warlocks challenging and they're doing almost the same amount of DPS. So in phase 1, the best class is definitely going to be warlock and hunter, or in a way I guess we can argue warrior being the best, but the chance for you to pull this off is also going to be very difficult. This is not the same case as hunter and warlock, which is why you also see so many more of those classes on top of the meter. Moving on to phase 2 analyzing to figure out if things will be exactly the same. World's first SSC and Tempest Keep were cleared within a couple of hours after the launch, and during the SSC fight we had warlocks, hunters and mages on top of the meter, and in Tempest Keep it were pretty close to the same, but this time around hunters and then warlocks on top of the meter. One thing to remember is that this guild were also the best speedrunners in the game, but as more guilds started clearing the raid, it also ended up being a bit different, where warriors, mages and warlocks were the overall best performing in the raid. And as people got their best in slot phase 2 gear, it didn't change much, it was still the same classes on top of the meter. What about SSC? Was this any different? In the beginning, it were pretty much just warlocks and mages on top of the meter, together with a couple of hunters. And warriors had a more difficult time during some of those fights. As they got better gear or well best in slot, it were all of a sudden different and warriors started to compete. Warriors didn't end up being the best, as mages were usually outperforming them on most fights. Even though hunters is nowhere to be seen within top 10 of world's best DPS, then they were still doing so good. And in most average guilds, they were probably within top 5 of the damage meter. Other classes were also starting to do way better, such as druids, rogues, shamans and paladins. I'm not saying they were doing really good, but they were starting to keep up with some of the other classes, at least if we compare it to Phase 1, where they were nowhere to be seen. Later on, Blizzard decided to nerf SSC and Tempest Keep to make the fights a lot easier. This is also known as Phase 2.5, and this changed a lot, where Hunters were now the best performing in SSC and Mages just dominating in Tempest Keep. As we progressed into Black Temple and Mount Hyjal, the game became so much more fun to me. Other classes were finally doing so much better. For example, Retro Paladins seal twisting, or Feral Druids just blasting with their insane crits. Enhancement and Elemental Shamans also did way better, especially Enhancement Shamans, but also Rogues as they got their Warclaves. The biggest problem were that most guilds only brought 1 or maximum 2 Rogues into their raid comp, which is why it would also be so difficult for you to get a raid spot. What about the Shadow Priest? Well, it did become better in Phase 3 compared to 1 and 2, and in casual guilds you would start to see them on the damage meter. In top guilds, they were never really within top 5. There's a reason to always bring a Shadow Priest though. Misery, a debuff that increases the spell damage taken by that target by 5%, not just for you, but for all your raid members as well. Another benefit is Vampiric Touch. This leaves a debuff on the target. 5% of all the damage you do is converted into mana for you and all your party members. So as a priest, you shouldn't really expect to compete with the other people, but you're in the raid to have fun and also to bring the raid some utility and nice benefits. Now you might also be curious, what specializations ended up being the best performing at the end of Black Temple and Mount Hyjal? BM Hunters at the top, together with Destruction Warlocks, Fairy Warriors, Combat Rogues and Arcane Mages. Remember, this is the average for each individual specialization. Therefore, it also seems like BM Hunter and Destro Warlock will be the easiest to play if you wish to perform well. I mean, spamming your Shadow Bolt isn't really that difficult, or just spamming your Steady Shot as a Hunter. However, if you wish to be on top of the meters as a Hunter, you also gotta learn how to melee weave. So, using your melee weapon in between your range attacks and your steady shots. When I checked old Warcraft logs for top 100 best DPS in the world during Black Temple and Mount Hyjal, it also became pretty clear. Yes, Warriors, Warlocks, Hunters, Rogues and Mages is the best in these raids. But will something change when we move into the last phase of Burning Crusade with the introduction of the new raid Sunwell? By the time most guilds were progressing in Sunwell, or clearing this every single week, most rogues also had their Warclaves, and at this point, warriors were also able to pick these up. This was a good decision, because warriors were doing so much better compared to rogues when they had these weapons. This also became pretty clear when I checked Warcraft logs for top 100 DPS in Sunwell. We never really saw any rogues within top 100. Maybe it might change on the anniversary realms, but I doubt it. I had to go to page 2 to find the first rogue. And this is also where I saw the first mage. I then had to scroll further down to find a rogue, but then again, 3200 DPS isn't bad. It isn't a huge difference compared to many of the other ones above the rogue. What also matters is what fight we're comparing. A single target fight is way better for a rogue, but also a Retro Paladin and Feral Druid. Fights where there's going to be more targets is going to be way better for a class with AoE and cleave abilities, which is why there's also a huge difference when we compare the different logs for each individual boss kill. Another specialization that shouldn't be underestimated is the Enhancement Shaman. Ever since phase 1, it has been doing pretty good, and as we're progressing through the different phases, they're just becoming better and better. So throughout the entire expansion, it is actually a specialization which is pretty fun to play. So what is the best DPS in the Burning Crusade? Well, it all depends if you're looking at short or long term. For example, in tier 5, 6 and Sunwell, it's going to change a lot, with mages being the best in the beginning, and at the end of the expansion, they're not really dominating as much. Those of you who would like to be on top of the meters during phase 1, so the beginning of Burning Crusade, you should either play Warrior, Hunter, Warlock or Mage. But then again, you shouldn't just pick a class because some people are performing the best. No, you should look into what class you find the most fun to play, as you'll probably be playing that throughout the entire expansion. And then it could end up being pretty boring if you're just spamming 1 or 2 buttons to be on top of the meter. This is why I'll soon also be working on a class picking guide, where I talk about the advantage and also disadvantage about each individual class. On my channel, you can find so many more useful Burning Crusade guides, and soon also a lot more, so make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell as you don't want to miss those upcoming videos. As always, thank you so much for watching and have an amazing day. Peace.